Zora Beaumont almost didn't come. She had been standing in front of her bathroom mirror for 20 minutes, going back and forth, dress on, dress off, one earring in, then out before Dissa knocked on the bathroom door and said flatly, "Zora, we are leaving in 4 minutes." She came. Velour was everything she expected and nothing she was prepared for. Dark and warm, cedar-scented, with lights turned low enough that everyone looked like the best version of themselves. An Afrobeat set was moving through the speakers and into the floor, and people were dancing, grinding, and dry humping on each other. Zora found the bar. She ordered a drink she didn't really want and held it while looking around. Dissa had already dissolved into the crowd, already laughing with someone, already being exactly herself without effort. Zora watched her and felt the familiar pull, half admiration, half longing, and then turned back to the bar. She was counting the minutes until she could go home. Then someone appeared beside her, not loudly. He just materialized tall, dark-eyed, and he was easily the most handsome man in the room, and he was right beside her. He looked at her, not at the other women in fishnets and scandalous outfits, directly at her. And he said, "You look like you're about to make a run for it." She laughed before she could stop herself. His name was Jay. Just Jay. He asked her questions and listened to the answers. He looked at her like she was worth looking at. By 2 a.m., butterflies were erupting in her belly each time he smiled or leaned in to talk in her ear over the loud music, and Dissa was texting. "Girl, if you don't." Zora made a decision with her whole chest. She left with him. She didn't know yet that the man beside her had been inside her worst memories for 8 years. You've ever been underestimated by someone who had no right to a front row seat in your life? Like and subscribe. Because what Zora finds out the next morning will break her open completely. And what comes after that, nobody saw it coming. Chapter 2, the hotel was only 6 blocks from Velour. Zora walked beside Jay in the Atlanta night air, and for once in her adult life she wasn't running a damage assessment on herself. She wasn't asking, "Why would he want you?" Or, "What happens when he really looks at you?" She was just walking, her heart beating wildly in her chest. She knew what was about to happen. How wouldn't she know with all the flirtatious comments and intense eye contacts they had exchanged in the last 4 hours? It was so unfamiliar it almost frightened her. She had spent 23 years learning to disappear in plain sight. Not dramatically. She hadn't run away or gone silent or made herself invisible. She had simply learned, very early and very thoroughly, that the safest version of herself was the smallest one. It started in her mother's kitchen. Claudette Beaumont was not a cruel woman. That's what made it so hard. She was a church-going, Sunday-cooking, genuinely loves her children kind of mother, and she had spent Zora's entire childhood watching her eldest daughter's plate with an expression that said, "I'm worried about you," when what it communicated was, "You are too big. Baby, push away from that plate. Men don't want all that tummy rolls." She said it like she was passing down wisdom, like she was doing Zora a favor. Zora was 9 years old the first time she heard it, and she nodded and moved her fork away and felt something go quiet inside her that hadn't been quiet before. Her sister Priya never heard it. Priya had what the aunts called good genes. Slim and bright-eyed, praised at every holiday table, held up without ever knowing she was being used as a comparison. Priya wasn't cruel about it. She just didn't notice. Children who aren't being compared rarely do. Zora noticed everything. By middle school, she had developed a talent for reading rooms, who was watching her, who was whispering, where the exits were. She walked into spaces already braced. She dressed to reduce commentary rather than to express anything. She ate what she wanted when she was alone and performed restraint in public. And she was 11 years old, and she already understood that her body was considered a problem that belonged to other people. Then came Westbrook High and Hyun Yi Woo. He arrived sophomore year from Charlotte's tech community. His father had relocated the family for business, and he came with cheekbones and a leather jacket and the easy, unbothered confidence of someone who had never once felt like an intruder. He was funny, magnetic. People hovered around him without being asked. Zora noticed him. He was very handsome, but she didn't dare dream that he would ever look her way. But he did, not just in the way she would have wanted. He saw her on a Tuesday in October. They were in the cafeteria. Zora was walking to her usual table, the one near the window at the back, away from the main crowd, and Hyeon-yi was holding court 2 tables over, and as she passed he said it, loud enough for his table but soft enough to seem casual. "Zora the Bora," the table laughed. Zora's face went red. She wanted the ground to open up and swallow her, but she kept walking. She sat down and opened her lunch and took 1 breath, then 2, and she did not cry because crying in front of them was the one thing she refused to give him. But it didn't stop. He was never violent, never obscene. He operated in the register of plausible deniability, the kind of cruelty that, if you reported it, would be met with, "It was just a joke," and a room full of people who agreed. He'd pass her locker and moo under his breath, just loud enough. He'd choose the desk beside her in group projects, and then perform shock when asked to pair with her, exaggerated, theatrical, always with an audience. The worst was the presentation, junior year, AP Biology. She was assigned to present with 3 others, and Hyeon-yi was in the audience, and 2 minutes into her section he shifted in his seat and said, in a stage whisper to the boy beside him, "Is that chair going to hold?" The class erupted. Zora stood at the front of the room with her poster board and her notes and her pounding heart, and she finished her presentation. Every word. She did not skip a single sentence. She got full marks. She went home and cried in the shower for 45 minutes. Dissa had wanted to fight him. Literally, "I will fight that boy, Zora, say the word." But Dissa fighting him would have made it worse, would have made Zora the girl who needed rescuing, which was its own kind of humiliation. Tamaz was different. Tamaz Whitfield, quiet, bookish, the 3rd point of their small triangle, sat with her in the library the afternoon after the presentation and didn't say anything for a long time. He just held her hand over a chemistry textbook and let her be sad without trying to fix it. That small act of witness was more than most people ever gave her. She survived by compartmentalizing. She filed Hyeon-yi Woo away in the deepest part of herself and graduated and moved to Atlanta for college and told herself she was starting over. Atlanta helped. Mostly, she built a life real and good in its way. A UX design career she was genuinely proud of. An apartment with a bay window she loved. A vinyl collection. Dissa, who had followed her south and remained her most constant person. Small joys, carefully tended. What she couldn't build was closeness. Every man who got near her tripped something, an old, deep alarm that said, "Wait, don't. They'll see you and then you'll be the joke again." She'd pull back before anything could develop. 2 kisses in 23 years. No love. A loneliness that had been with her so long she'd started treating it like furniture. Until tonight. She stood outside the hotel now, Jay's hand warm at the small of her back as he held the door, and the alarm, that reliable, faithful alarm, had not gone off once all evening. Not once. She didn't know what to do with that. She walked through the door anyway. The morning, she would wish she hadn't, but not for the reason you'd expect. Chapter 3, she woke up before he did. The room was gold, that early morning gold that comes through hotel curtains and makes everything look softened. Jay was still asleep beside her, one arm loose at his side, breathing slow and even. Zora lay there and did something she almost never did. She stayed. She didn't reach for her phone. Didn't start calculating exit strategies. Didn't begin the usual internal audit. Too loud last night, laughed too much, took up too much space. She just lay there in the warm quiet and let herself feel what she felt. And what she felt was good, more than good. Last night had been, she pressed her lips together and stared at the ceiling and allowed herself the full truth of it. It had been the first time she'd ever felt present in her own body. Not performing, not managing, not waiting for the moment he'd look at her with disappointment. She had been there entirely, and so had he, and it had been tender and funny and honest in ways she hadn't known to ask for. She felt its still warmth in her chest, a looseness in her shoulders that she didn't recognize because she couldn't remember ever not being tense. She looked at him, his jaw relaxed in sleep, his hands resting open. He had a small scar near his left eyebrow she hadn't noticed at the club. She had spent the night with this man and she did not want to leave, and that simple, quiet fact was new enough to feel like a discovery. You're allowed this, she thought. And for once she believed it. Her phone buzzed. She almost ignored it. Then she reached over careful, quiet, not wanting to wake him, and looked at the screen. A text. A photo attached. The caption read, "Okay, wait, someone just posted this in the Westbrook High alumni group. Who remembers this guy?" "He's in Atlanta now, apparently." Eyes. Zora opened the photo. A younger face. A leather jacket. Mid-laugh, head thrown back, the way someone laughs when the joke is at someone else's expense. A name in the caption below, tagged for everyone to see. Hyeon-yi Woo, Charlotte's own. She read the name twice. Nothing happened for a moment. She just stared at the screen. The room was still gold. Jay was still breathing beside her. Everything looked exactly the same. Then something dropped out of the bottom of her stomach. She turned her head slowly and looked at him. Really looked, and began to see what she had not assembled the night before because she'd had no reason to. The jaw. The hands. The scar near the eyebrow. The way he'd laughed at the bar, head tilting back, easy and unguarded. Jay, short for Hyeon-yi. Her body understood before her mind caught up. She went completely still, the old reflex, the one she'd developed in high school hallways, absorbing impact before it could show on her face. She was 23 years old. She was also 15, standing at the front of a classroom finishing a presentation while a table full of people laughed, both at once, at the same time. In the same body, she did not make a sound. She got up. She gathered her dress, her shoes, her bag. She moved through the room quietly. At the door, she stopped, hand on the handle, and looked back at him one more time. He was still asleep, still peaceful. He had no idea she left. The cab ride home took 19 minutes. She counted them. Dessa was already at her apartment. She had a key. And when Zora walked through the door still in her going-out dress, heels in her hand, Dessa stood up from the couch and her face said she already knew something was wrong. Zora sat down on the kitchen floor. Dessa sat beside her without being asked. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Zora stared at the cabinet across the kitchen. Her going-out dress was wrinkled. She could still smell the cedar from velour in the fabric, and if she closed her eyes, she could also feel the warmth of his lips on her skin. Then she said very quietly, "It was him." Dessa went still. She didn't ask who. She didn't say, "What do you mean?" She had been Zora's best friend since the 8th grade. She knew exactly what those 3 words meant and exactly how much it had taken to say them out loud on a kitchen floor at 7 in the morning. She reached over and took Zora's hand and held it. That was all. Zora didn't cry. She sat there and breathed and tried to hold 2 things at once, the warmth of what last night had been and the weight of who he was, and found that she couldn't. They didn't fit in the same space. She didn't know what to do with that. An hour later, her phone lit up on the counter. A call. His name, Jay, on the screen. She stared at it until it rang out. She did not block him. She didn't know why. That frightened her more than anything else. Chapter 4. He called again that evening. She watched the phone from across. It rang 6 times. Stopped. A minute later, a text appeared. "Hey, I don't know what happened this morning. Just want to make sure you're okay. She read it 4 times. Put the phone face down on the coffee table. Went to bed. That was day 1. Day 2, she went to work. She was a UX designer at a mid-sized tech firm in Midtown, and her job required her to be precise and calm and focused on other people's problems, which suited her fine for the next 8 hours. She presented wireframes in a team meeting. She gave feedback on a prototype. She ate lunch at her desk, a habit she'd formed not out of busyness, but because the office kitchen required too much small talk and she didn't have the bandwidth for small talk right now. Her manager told her the Henderson project looked great. She said thank you and meant none of it, because her mind kept circling back to the same thing. He had been Jay at the bar. Just Jay, warm and attentive and sweet. And she had chosen him with full trust, full willingness, full openness. The first time she had ever done that, and the person she'd chosen was Hyun-Yi Woo. That kept arriving at her, over and over in the middle of meetings and on her walk to the train and in the shower at night. That kept arriving at her. Dissa called on day 3. You need to talk to him. Don't need to do anything. Zora. Dissa, I'm not ready. I'm not saying forgive him. I'm not saying anything about what happened in high school. I'm saying you cannot let him think last night meant nothing because it didn't mean nothing and he deserves to know why you left, even if he doesn't deserve much else. Was quiet for a long time. Then, what if I face him and it doesn't help? What if I say everything and I still feel this way? Dissa's voice went gentle. Then at least it's out of you, and it stops living in your chest. Didn't answer. But she didn't hang up either. Day 4, she texted him. Coffee tomorrow, 10 a.m. Perk and grind on Peachtree. His response came in 40 seconds. I'll be there, she told Dissa the time and place. Dissa said she'd be at the table near the window, visible, but not in the conversation unless Zora needed her there. In case Bings went south, Zora said. Don't say anything. No matter what, Dissa said. I won't say a word. Then to him. Arrived first, she had half expected him to be late or to look unbothered or to greet her with the easy social grace he'd walked into Velour with. Instead, he was sitting at the table when she walked in, hands wrapped around a coffee cup, and he looked like someone who had not slept well in 4 days. Good, she thought, and then felt tired for thinking it. She sat down across from him, didn't order anything, put her bag on the chair beside her. He opened his mouth, she said. Don't, let me go first. Closed it. She looked at him directly, without flinching, something she had never once allowed herself to do in high school, and she began. She told him about the nickname. Zora the Bora, the cafeteria. The exact Tuesday in October, the way the table sounded when it laughed. She told him about the locker, the moo, 4 years of something so casual and so sustained that it had restructured the way she moved through the world. She told him about the presentation, the chair, the audience, standing at the front and finishing every single word while her body burned with humiliation. She didn't scream. Her voice didn't shake. She sat across from the man who had done all of it, and she named it, all of it. She told him what it did to her after. Every man she walked away from. Every mirror she avoided. The alarm system she'd built inside herself that went off every time someone got close. That was you, she said. That alarm was built out of you. The coffee shop was not quiet. There were other people, other conversations, a machine steaming milk somewhere behind the counter. But between them there was complete silence. Hyun-Yi's jaw was tight. His eyes were red at the edges. He did not look away from her, he said. You deserved none of it. I was a coward performing for people who weren't worth it, and I aimed it at the person least likely to crumble. A pause. You never crumbled, I never forgot that. She stared at him. She had walked in here wanting his guilt, his shame, something to confirm that he was exactly who she'd filed away in the deepest vault of herself, small, cruel, unchanged. He had given her something she didn't know what to do with instead, something that almost made sense. She hated him for that. She picked up her bag and walked out. And the worst part, the part that would keep her awake that night, was that she wasn't sure she was done with the conversation. Chapter 5. 3 weeks passed. Zora did not call Hyun-yi. He did not call her. The silence between them was not peaceful, it had weight and texture, but she had decided, somewhere around day 5, that she was done letting him take up space in her head that she hadn't offered him. She was trying something new. She was trying to move forward. Disa hosted dinner on a Friday, nothing formal. Just 4 people around a small table in her apartment. Jerk chicken from the place on Edgewood. Candles because Disa believed every meal deserved candles. The 4th person was Callum Reeves. Disa had mentioned him once briefly. He's an architect. He's good people. Just come. Zora came. Callum was tall, dark-skinned, with warm eyes and an unhurried way of speaking that made everything he said feel considered. He brought wine, not because anyone asked, just because he'd thought to. He asked Zora what she did about 20 minutes in, and when she explained UX design, the user research, the wireframing, the way she thought about how people moved through digital spaces, he leaned forward slightly and said, "So you're basically trying to make people feel less lost." She blinked. "Yeah, that's exactly it." Nodded like she'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. By the end of the evening, she had laughed more than she had in 3 weeks. He walked her to her car like a gentleman and said he'd like to see her again if she was open to it. She said she was open to it, and she was open to it. The following Saturday, he showed up at her door with sunflowers and said he'd heard there was a farmer's market on Ponce he'd been meaning to try. They walked through it for 2 hours. He didn't hold her hand at first. Then, somewhere between the honey vendor and a table of handmade ceramics, his hand found hers without announcement, without asking, without making it a moment. Just there, like it belonged, she didn't pull away. 2 weeks after that, she told him about her mother. Not all of it, but enough. The dinner table comments, the comparisons to Priya. The way Claudette's love had always arrived with conditions attached. She told him carefully, watching his face for signs that it was too much. He didn't flinch. Didn't say she probably just meant well, or I'm sure she loves you. He just listened, and when she finished, he said, "That must have been exhausting to grow up in." 4 words, no fix, no reframe. She felt something go quiet in her chest. She was beginning slowly, with great caution, to believe this was the right one. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, not an email. A letter handwritten in an envelope with her name on the front in careful print. 3 pages, both sides. She almost didn't open it. Then she did. It was from Hyun-yi. He did not begin with an apology. He began with, "I've been trying to write this for 3 weeks and I keep starting over, so I'm going to stop trying to make it sound right and just tell you what's true." Wrote about his father, a man who measured everything, including his son, by how other people responded to him. Who had taught Hyun-yi, without words, that weakness was the worst thing you could show. That the safest position in any room was the one with social power, and social power meant making others smaller before they could make you small first. He wrote about high school, not explaining it, not dressing it up, just nomming what he'd done and who he'd been doing it for. Boys who mattered to him at 16 and were strangers to him now. A performance that cost him nothing at the time and had apparently cost her everything. He wrote about therapy. About the moment, a therapist asked him to think about a person he'd genuinely harmed, and he'd seen Zora's face before he'd seen anyone else's. About the fact that he'd looked her up, over the years, not to contact her, but because he felt he owed it to her to at least know she was okay. He did not ask for forgiveness. The last line read, "I'm not sending this because I want anything from you. I'm sending it because you told me the truth in that coffee shop and you deserve the same back." She read it twice. Then she folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, and placed it in her nightstand drawer. She told no one. That evening, Callum texted her, You looked beautiful tonight. She stared at the message. She waited for the warmth that usually came with it. The small lift in her chest she'd been learning to recognize over the past few weeks. It didn't come. She put the phone down, felt guilty for feeling nothing, picked it up again, put it down. Then she opened the nightstand drawer, looked at the envelope, and closed it again. She didn't know why she kept doing that. That was the part that worried her. Chapter 6. It happened in the same week, both of them. As if the universe had decided she'd had enough peace and was correcting the balance, Priya called on a Wednesday afternoon. Not to warn her, Priya never warned, Priya reported. Mama saw his name on your phone when you left it on the counter at Easter. Hyanyi. She looked it up. A pause. She called Aunt Renee. Zora closed her eyes. Aunt Renee calling meant a family position had been established. It meant by Thursday, everyone would have an opinion, and by Sunday someone would bring it up at dinner, and the conversation would be about her the way conversations in her family were always about her, concerned on the surface, critical underneath. She was right. Her mother called Friday evening. Claudette did not raise her voice. She never needed to. Her power was precision, the ability to find the exact sentence that would do the most damage and deliver it in a tone that sounded like love. I heard you've been talking to a Korean boy from high school, the one who gave you a hard time. We had one conversation, Mama. Zora. A pause. Only a girl with no self-respect goes back to a man who treated her like that. Stood in her kitchen and held the phone and did not speak. Just saying, you have Callum. A good man who actually sees you. Why are you holding on to someone who made your life miserable? Not holding on to him. Then why do you have his name in your phone? There was no answer to that question that Claudette would accept. Zora knew that. She had always known that. The conversation was never really a conversation, it was a verdict, delivered in the form of a question. She said, I have to go, Mama, and ended the call. She stood in the kitchen for a long time. Then she sat down at the table and she let herself feel the full weight of what her mother had just said, not the words exactly, but the pattern beneath them. 23 years of it. Push away from that plate. Men don't want all that. No self-respect. Always dressed as worry. Always leaving Zora smaller than she'd been before the phone rang. And the real thing, was that Claudette had spent 23 years treating her daughter with the same carelessness she was now criticizing Hyanyi for. The irony sat in the room, enormous and unspoken, the way it always had. This time, Zora didn't go cry in the bathroom. She sat at the table and she let the anger come, and instead of swallowing it, she followed it, traced it back to where it started, watched it point at everything it had been pointing at for years. Her mother's voice, her aunt's chorus, the Thanksgiving tables and the Easter dinners and the cousin comparisons and the portion monitoring. All of it, it had been the foundation of her self-destruction all along. She wasn't healed. She wasn't done. But she was done being demolished without noticing it. Dissa texted Sunday night, Can I come over? I need to show you something. She came with her phone and a look on her face that Zora recognized, the look Dissa wore when she had information she didn't want to have. She sat beside Zora on the couch and pulled up a message thread on her screen. A conversation between Callum and a mutual friend, Marcus, someone both of them knew from the design community. Zora read it. Callum had been describing their relationship to Marcus for weeks, and Marcus had sent the screenshots to Dissa. She's not what most guys would go for, you know. Months ago, I wouldn't too. I guess I just want to try something new. Later. Honestly, this whole thing has been like an experiment for me. Being with someone with low self-esteem. Even the barest minimum would feel like the whole world. Zora read it twice. Then she put the phone down on the coffee table and sat back. Dissa was watching her carefully. Z, he thinks he's doing me a favor, Zora said, quietly. Not a question. Dissa didn't answer. Of this has just been a joke to him. She looked at the ceiling. And I almost let him. She understood, sitting there, why his attention had felt so familiar, why she'd accepted it so readily. It looked like being chosen. It felt like being seen. But it wasn't. It was being pitied, wrapped in warmth, handed to her in the same packaging her mother's criticism had always used. She had been here before. She had just never been able to name it. Have to end it, she said. I know, Dissa said. She had no safe place now. Her family was a wound. Callum had been a performance. And Hyeon-yi, complicated, honest, responsible for the worst years of her life, was still in a nightstand drawer she couldn't stop opening. For the first time, she had nowhere to hide. She sat with that, and somewhere underneath the wreckage, something in her went very still and very clear. She picked up her phone, not to call Callum, not to call her mother. She opened the nightstand drawer one more time, and this time she didn't close it. Chapter 7, she met Callum at the coffee shop on Tuesday, not perk and grind, somewhere neutral. She got there first, ordered water, and sat with her hands flat on the table, not fidgeting, not rehearsing. She had already said everything she needed to say inside her own head, and she was done practicing. He walked in smiling. That almost made it harder. He looked like he was genuinely glad to see her. She could tell the difference now between performed warmth and real warmth, and his was real. That was the complicated part. He wasn't a bad man. He had not set out to reduce her. He had simply built a story where he was the generous one and she was the lucky one, and he'd believed it so completely that he never once questioned whether she'd agreed to that version. She waited until he sat down, then she said, I know about the messages to Marcus. His smile shifted. She didn't give him time to find the right framing. I'm not angry. I need you to hear that. I'm not sitting here because I want to hurt you, but I can't be someone's experiment. I'm not a project, and I don't think you even realize what you've been doing, which is almost the harder part. Opened his mouth. Zora, that's not. I think you love the idea of me more than you actually being with me, she said. And I can't build anything on that. Silence. He tried once more, not defensive, just desperate. I do want to be with you. My motives were not right initially, but I'm genuinely falling for Callum. She said his name gently. I don't need you to convince me. I need you to let me go. Looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, slowly muttering apologies. She picked up her bag and left. Dissa was waiting outside on the pavement. She fell into step beside Zora without a word. They walked 3 blocks before either of them spoke, and it was Dissa who finally said, quietly, You okay? Yeah, Zora said. And then, I didn't cry. No, I was watching through the window. Almost smiled. Of course you were. That night, alone in her apartment, she put a record on. She didn't choose it deliberately, just pulled one from the shelf, set the needle down, and went to sit by the bay window. The city was doing what the city always did, indifferent and bright and enormous outside the glass. She tucked her feet under her and listened to the music and let her mind go where it needed to go. It went to her mother first. Claudette's voice in its familiar register. No self-respect, push away from the plate, men don't want all that. She let herself hear it fully without flinching, and then she did something she had never managed before. She named it for what it was. Not love with poor delivery, not concern that came out wrong. It was a woman passing her own wounds to her daughter and calling it guidance. That was the truth. It had always been the truth. She was done pretending otherwise. Then Callum. His warmth, his flowers, his hand at the farmer's market. All real, all genuine, all built on a foundation that had her playing a supporting role in her own life. She had chosen him because he felt safe, and he'd felt safe because his attention looked like being valued. She understood now that there was a difference between a man who sees you and a man who feels good about himself for seeing you. Then last velour. Not Jay, not Hyeon-yi. Just herself in that dress, holding a drink she didn't really want, counting the minutes until she could go home. And then deciding not to, That woman, the one who stayed, who laughed before she could stop herself, who walked through a hotel door at 2 a.m. with her whole chest, that was not a mistake. That was the most honest she had been in years. She got up, went to the nightstand, opened the drawer. She read the letter a third time, not looking for reasons to forgive him, not building a case. She read it carefully with the understanding that people contain more than their worst moments, even when their worst moments were aimed at you. She didn't absolve him. She didn't need to. She just finally stopped needing him to only be that. She picked up her phone. She found his name. She pressed call. It rang twice. He picked up. She opened her mouth, and for once in her life, she didn't plan what came next. Chapter 8, It's Zora, she said, as if he wouldn't know, a pause, not long, just enough to tell her he was being careful with this. I know, he said. Hi, just hi, no rush to fill the space. She had expected him to say more, and the fact that he didn't made her breathe a little easier. Want to talk, she said. In person, not a coffee shop. Okay, my apartment, tomorrow at 7. Another pause. I'll be there. She hung up, sat back. Put the phone face up on the bed and stared at the ceiling and thought, I don't know how this ends. And then, that's okay. That was new. He arrived at 7 exactly. He knocked, didn't text that he was outside, didn't call ahead, just knocked. She appreciated that. She opened the door and he was standing in the hallway in a dark jacket, hands at his sides, and he looked the way he'd looked at the coffee shop, like a man who had been honest with himself about what he deserved and had stopped expecting more. In, she said. He came in. He looked at her apartment, the bay window, the record shelf, the small, careful life she'd built, and he didn't comment on it. He sat where she gestured and he waited. She sat across from him. She had not rehearsed this. She had made a decision not to, because every time she'd rehearsed things in her life, she'd ended up managing the other person's feelings instead of telling her own truth. So she just opened her mouth and let it come. Not calling you because I've forgiven you completely, she said. I want you to know that. Forgiveness isn't a switch I can flip. What you did in high school is still in me. It changed how I moved through the world for 8 years, and I can't hand that back to you just because you've grown up. Nodded. He didn't interrupt. And I'm not calling because of velour. That night it was real. But I'm not here because of one night. She looked at him, directly. The way she'd looked at him in the coffee shop, the way she'd refused to look at him in high school because looking at him had always meant bracing for impact. I'm done making decisions from that place in me that's waiting to be humiliated. I've been doing it my whole life, leaving before anyone could make me leave, choosing safe over true, never staying long enough to find out what happens if someone actually knows me and stays anyway. She paused. I called you because I'm done with that, not because you earned it. Because I decided to stop running and you happened to be the thing I was running from. Was very still, she said. I'm not starting over with you. I'm not pretending the past didn't happen, but I'm also not letting it be the last thing that defines me. The room was quiet, then Hyani said, That's more than I deserve. Yes, she said. It is. Looked at her, not with relief, not with gratitude, but with something more honest than either. Can I say something? He asked. Yes. Didn't reach across the table. He didn't move toward her at all. He just sat where he was and said, In high school, I told myself you were the target because you were strong enough to take it. That's what I said in my head. Like I was doing you a favor by choosing you because you wouldn't break. He stopped. I've been in therapy long enough to know that was a lie I told myself so I didn't have to feel what I was actually doing. The truth is I chose you because you were the least likely to fight back in a way that cost me anything. And that's a much harder thing to say. The room held it. Father, he continued, ran his whole life on approval. Everything was about how we looked to other people. I absorbed that before I had words for it. That doesn't excuse it. It just explains who I was at 16. He paused. I spent a long time becoming someone I could stand to be. I don't know if that matters to you. But it's true. She listened to all of it. not to let him off the hook, not to find the moment she could forgive him and close the chapter. She listened because for the first time, she was genuinely curious about him, not the boy who had wounded her, but the person sitting across from her now, who had looked at his worst self honestly enough to describe it without softening. That was not nothing. They sat together for another hour, not kissing, not declaring anything. Just talking, really talking, with the past on the table between them and neither of them pretending it wasn't there. When he left, she stood at the door and he said, "Thank you for calling," she said. "Thank you for coming." She closed the door, put her back against it. Breathed, she had stayed in the room, and nothing bad had happened. And tomorrow, whatever tomorrow looked like, she would face it as the version of herself who had finally, fully refused to disappear. That was enough. For tonight, that was everything. Chapter 9. Time passed the way it does when you stop fighting it. Not in a rush, not in a crawl, just steadily, one ordinary day after another, each one a little different from the version of ordinary she'd built before. She didn't mark the weeks. She just lived in them, and slowly, the living began to feel less like something she was struggling to do and more like something she was actually doing. Sunday mornings became theirs, without anyone deciding they would. It started with one, Halunya, showing up at her door with coffee because he'd been in the neighborhood, which was only half true and they both knew it. Then another. Then a third. By the fourth Sunday, she didn't think of it as something new. She just thought of it as Sunday. They were at her kitchen table when the argument started. It was about nothing. A documentary she'd recommended that he'd watched and hadn't liked, and she'd taken it more personally than made sense, and he'd pointed that out, and she'd told him that wasn't the point, and for about 4 minutes they were both talking over each other. Then he said, very seriously, "I just think the narrator had no energy." And she stared at him. The narrator won an award. For what? Putting people to sleep. She laughed before she could stop herself. It came out loud and unguarded, and he laughed too, and just like that the argument dissolved into something warm. He reached across the table and took her hand. He didn't make it a moment. He just did it, the way he'd been doing small things, consistently and without performance for weeks now. She looked at their hands and felt the full truth of it. This was not a fairy tale. He had been someone who hurt her deeply. She had been someone who almost let fear write the rest of her story. They were building something on ground that was complicated, and they both knew it, and they were building it anyway. That was not a small thing. That was, she was learning what real looked like. Brunch with Dussa was the following Saturday. They sat across from each other at their usual place, corner table, good light, the menu they both knew by heart but always pretended to read. Dussa had mimosas. Zara had coffee. They talked about Dussa's job, about a show they were both watching, about nothing important and everything that was. At some point, Dussa went quiet and just looked at her. Zara looked back. What? Dussa shook her head slowly. Then she picked up her glass. Zara picked up hers. They didn't say a word. They didn't need to. 8 years of friendship, through high school hallways and Atlanta apartments and kitchen floors and coffee shops and every hard thing in between. And sometimes the truest thing you could say was a raised glass and a held gaze. Zara felt it land in her chest, warm and steady. The one love in her life that had never asked her to be smaller. The one person who had always just wanted her to be whole. Claudette called on a Tuesday. The voice was the same. The rhythm of it, the gentle interrogation dressed as concern, the comments that arrived sideways and left marks, all the same. Her mother had not changed. Zara had stopped waiting for her to. She stood in her kitchen and held the phone and listened and responded from a place in herself that was calm and removed enough that the words landed but didn't go deep. She answered what she could. She let the rest pass. At the end of the call, she said, "I love you, Mama." She meant it. That was the complicated, true part. She meant it, and she also knew that love was not the same as agreement, and it was not the same as access, and it was not the same as permission to be dismantled. She hung up before it could go further. She stood in the quiet kitchen and recognized what she felt. Not victory, not grief, just clarity. The kind that comes when you finally stop expecting a person to be different from who they are. She called to Muzz that evening. He picked up on the second ring, same as always, "Zara B, it's been too long." And she laughed and agreed, and they talked for an hour. She told him everything. All of it, from velour to the letter to Cullum to the Tuesday night when she'd called Hanya and stayed in the room. He listened the way he always had, completely, without rushing, without turning it into advice. When she finished, there was a pause. Then Tamaz said, "You never crumbled. I always knew you wouldn't." She had heard versions of that sentence before. Hanya had said something close to it in the coffee shop, but sitting with the phone warm against her ear, hearing it in Tamaz's voice, the boy who had held her hand over a chemistry textbook while she cried silently, who had witnessed her at her most broken and never once looked at her like she was less. She felt something she hadn't felt the other times. She believed him. Fully, without the quiet internal argument that usually followed a compliment. She believed him. Later that night, she put a record on. She went to the bay window. The city was out there doing what it always did, enormous and indifferent and full of 1,000 stories happening all at once, none of them aware of hers. She looked at it and felt, for the first time in as long as she could remember, that her story was enough. That she was enough, not despite everything, not in spite of it, just enough, plainly and completely, because she had always been. The girl who had spent 23 years folding herself into corners was standing at her own window in her own life, taking up every inch of space she was entitled to. She was not waiting for someone to confirm it. She already knew. The girl who learned to shrink herself finally decided she would rather be too much than never enough. And that, not the man, not the forgiveness, not the romance, that was the love story that mattered most. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. That means everything. If Zara's story touched you, if any part of it felt familiar, if you've ever made yourself smaller for people who didn't deserve the full version of you, please like this video and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. And I want to ask you something, and I really want you to answer this in the comments. What was the moment in your life when you finally stopped shrinking for someone who never deserved that power over you? Tell me. I read every single one. The next story is coming, and trust me, you are not ready for it.